The thunder of hooves against the dry, cracked earth was the only sound Olivia Blackett could hear over her own ragged breathing as she pushed her horse harder, faster, away from the nightmare she had called home for the past 22 years. The year was 1875, and for the first time in her life, she was choosing her own path, even if that path led straight into the unforgiving wilderness of the Montana Territory, with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's silver locket pressed against her chest. Olivia's golden hair had come loose from its pins, streaming behind her like a flag of rebellion as she rode. Her hands, once soft and unblemished from a life of forced gentility, were now raw and blistered from gripping the reins. The welts on her back from her father's belt still stung beneath her dress, but the physical pain paled in comparison to the years of emotional torment she was finally leaving behind. The small town of Fairhaven disappeared behind her as she crested a hill, the vast expanse of the western frontier spreading before her like an untamed promise. Tears streamed down her face, not of sorrow but of relief and fear mingled together in a potent cocktail that made her dizzy with its intensity. She had planned this escape for months, secretly selling her needlework in town and saving every penny. When her father had discovered her small cache of money last night and demanded to know its purpose, the fury in his eyes had told her everything. She knew that if she stayed one more day, she might never leave alive. Her mother had died under similar circumstances 7 years ago, a fall down the stairs that the town doctor had questioned but ultimately recorded as an accident at her father's insistence. The sun was beginning to set when Olivia's exhausted mare stumbled. The poor animal had been pushed to its limits, and Olivia, feeling immediately guilty, slowed their pace and scanned the horizon for shelter. The temperature would drop soon, and the thin shawl she'd grabbed in her hasty departure would offer little protection against the chill of a Montana night. In the distance, she spotted a thin plume of smoke rising against the darkening sky. Hope and apprehension battled within her. Smoke meant people, and people could mean help or harm. After her experiences, Olivia was well acquainted with how easily kindness could mask cruelty. But with night falling and her options limited, she guided her tired horse toward the promise of fire and possibly food. As she approached, she made out the shape of a small cabin nestled against a stand of pines. A corral contained several horses, and a wagon sat nearby. The scene was so perfectly peaceful that Olivia hesitated, suddenly aware of how she must appear disheveled, desperate, and clearly running from something. Before she could decide whether to approach or retreat, the cabin door swung open and a tall figure emerged, rifle in hand. The man paused on the porch, his silhouette backlit by the warm glow from inside. "Who's there?" His voice carried across the yard, deep and cautious but not immediately threatening. Olivia swallowed hard, her throat dry from dust and fear. "I'm sorry to intrude," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "My name is Olivia Blackett. My horse is exhausted, and I need a place to rest for the night." The man lowered his rifle slightly but didn't set it aside. "Ride closer where I can see you proper." She complied, guiding her mare forward until she reached the edge of the light spilling from the cabin's windows. Now she could see him clearly, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that brushed his collar and a face weathered by sun and wind. He wasn't old, perhaps 30 at most, but his eyes held the wariness of someone who had seen more than his share of trouble. Those eyes widened slightly as they took in her appearance, the torn sleeve of her dress, the bruise blooming on her cheekbone, and the unmistakable look of someone fleeing in haste. "You running from something, miss?" he asked, his voice softening just enough to give her courage. Olivia straightened her spine, summoning what dignity she could. "Not something, someone, my father." She saw no point in lying. If this man meant her harm, a falsehood wouldn't save her, and if he had any decency, the truth might compel him to help. The man studied her for a long moment before nodding once and lowering his rifle completely. "Name's Rylan Grayson," he said. "Got some stew on the fire and a spare bedroll you can use for the night." He gestured toward the corral. "Your horse looks ready to drop. Let's get her settled first." Relief made Olivia's hands shake as she dismounted, her legs nearly buckling beneath her after hours in the saddle. Rylan stepped forward quickly, catching her elbow to steady her. His touch was gentle but firm, and something about it, perhaps the fact that it held no threat, no demand, brought tears to her eyes that she hastily blinked away. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson," she said, pulling herself together with effort. "I won't impose on your hospitality for long." A hint of a smile touched his lips, softening the hard planes of his face. "Out here, Miss Blackett, hospitality isn't an imposition, it's survival." He took the reins from her hands. "And it's just Rylan. Mr. Grayson was my father, and trust me, you don't want to be reminding me of him." Something in his tone made her look at him sharply, a flash of understanding passing between them. Perhaps they had more in common than she'd initially thought. As they led her mare to the corral, Olivia took the opportunity to study her reluctant host more carefully. Rylan Grayson moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hard work and self-reliance. His clothes were worn but clean, faded denim pants, a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle, and scuffed leather boots. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the holster worn in a way that suggested the weapon was as much a tool as his knife or the axe propped against the chopping block nearby. "You've come a fair distance," he commented as he helped remove the saddle from her horse. "Fairhaven's the closest town, and that's nearly 20 miles back." Olivia tensed. "How did you know I came from Fairhaven?" he shrugged, hefting the saddle onto a rail. "Direction you came from, the exhaustion of your horse, and the fact that your dress, despite the dirt and tears, is finer than anything you'd find in the smaller settlements further out." His eyes met hers. "I make it my business to know the territory." "Are you a lawman?" she asked, suddenly wary. Rylan's laugh was short and without humor. "No, madam, just a man who's learned the hard way that knowledge keeps you alive out here." He began brushing down her mare with sure, gentle strokes. "I'm a rancher, small operation, just getting started. Do some hunting and trapping in the winter months when the cattle work is lighter." Olivia watched him tend to her horse with more care than the animal had likely ever received in the Blackett stable. "You're very kind to help a stranger. Like I said, out here kindness isn't optional." He finished with the mare and turned to face Olivia fully. "Now, I don't mean to pry, but those marks on you tell a story I've seen before. Your father likely to come looking for you?" The question sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Yes," she admitted. "Though not out of any fatherly concern. Lyman Blackett doesn't tolerate defiance, especially not from his daughter, and I took something when I left." Her hand went unconsciously to the small pouch hidden in her skirts where she'd secreted the money, and her mother's wedding ring, the only items of value she'd been able to grab in her haste. Rylan nodded, his expression grave. "Rich man, the richest in Fairhaven. He owns the bank and half the businesses in town. Then he won't take kindly to being robbed, even by his own flesh and blood." Olivia flinched at his blunt assessment. "I didn't steal," she began defensively, then stopped herself. "The money was mine, earned through my needlework. The ring was my mother's. He had no right to either." To her surprise, Rylan smiled a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Never said you stole anything, Miss Blackett, just pointing out how your father's likely to see it." He gestured toward the cabin. "Come on. That stew won't eat itself, and you look like you could use a hot meal." The interior of the cabin was simple but surprisingly comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a pot of something savory smelling bubbling over the flames. A solid wooden table with 2 chairs stood in the center of the main room, and a curtained-off area in the back presumably led to sleeping quarters. Everything was neat and orderly, with none of the carelessness she might have expected from a bachelor's dwelling. "It's not much," Rylan said, watching her take in her surroundings, "but it's mine. Built it with my own hands 2 summers ago." "It's lovely," Olivia replied honestly. After the oppressive grandeur of her father's house, with its heavy furniture and darker secrets, the cabin's simple warmth felt like a revelation. Rylan gestured to a basin of water near the back. You can wash up if you like while I dish up the food." Gratefully, Olivia scrubbed the dust from her face and hands, wincing as the water stung her raw palms. When she turned back, Rylan was setting 2 bowls of stew on the table, along with a plate of cornbread. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "Eat." The stew was simple venison, potatoes, and carrots in a rich broth, but to Olivia, it tasted better than any fine dinner she'd been served at her father's table. She ate with unladylike enthusiasm, only becoming self-conscious when she realized Rylan was watching her with a mixture of amusement and concern. "When did you last eat?" he asked. Olivia considered. "Yesterday morning, I think. I was too nervous to eat after that, and then—" "Well, things happened quickly." Rylan pushed the plate of cornbread closer to her. "You want to tell me what things those were?" For a moment, Olivia hesitated. She had never spoken openly about her life with her father. Such matters weren't discussed in polite society. And Lyman Blackett had made certain his household affairs remained private. But sitting across from this stranger who had offered help without question, she found herself wanting to unburden the truth she had carried alone for so long. "My father has always been strict," she began carefully. "After my mother died, he became worse. Nothing I did was ever good enough. He controlled everything, what I wore, who I spoke to when I left the house." She took a deep breath. "Last night he found the money I'd been saving. He was angry." "That where those bruises came from?" Rylan asked quietly. Olivia nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "He said he'd arranged my marriage to Harold Jenkins, a widower from the next county. 53 years old with a reputation for unkindness to his first wife." She swallowed hard. "The wedding was to be next week. I knew if I didn't leave, I'd end up like my mother." "Dead at the bottom of a staircase." Rylan's perception startled her. "How did you—" "It's a common enough story," he said grimly. "And you mentioned her earlier, the way you said it. Well, I can recognize a lie when I hear one, even secondhand." Olivia felt a tear slip down her cheek and brushed it away angrily. "Everyone knew, the whole town knew what he was, what he did to her, to me, but no one ever said a word. His money bought their silence." Rylan's hand clenched around his spoon, knuckles whitening. "Money talks louder than conscience in most places," he said. "But you got out. That takes courage or desperation," she countered. "Sometimes they're the same thing." He rose from the table and moved to a trunk in the corner, pulling out a clean flannel shirt and a pair of pants that had seen better days. "These will be too big, but they're clean. You can sleep in the bed. I'll take the floor out here." Olivia began to protest, but Rylan held up a hand. "Don't worry about propriety, Miss Blackett. Out here, practicality trumps social niceties. You need rest more than I do, and that dress looks like it wasn't made for sleeping in." He was right, of course. Her once fine blue dress was torn and filthy, the corset beneath pinching painfully after hours in the saddle. Still, the thought of accepting such intimate hospitality from a man she'd just met went against everything she'd been taught. "I couldn't possibly take your bed," she insisted. Rylan's expression softened. "You've had a hard enough day without adding a night on a hard floor to it. I've slept on worse than my own cabin floor plenty of times." He handed her the clothes. "There's a screen in the corner you can change behind. I'll step outside to check on the horses and give you some privacy." Before she could argue further, he was gone, the cabin door closing firmly behind him. Olivia stood alone in the suddenly quiet space, clutching the borrowed clothes and trying to make sense of the bewildering turn her life had taken. 24 hours ago, she had been a prisoner in her father's house, facing a future that terrified her. Now she was standing in a stranger's cabin, miles from everything she'd ever known, about to sleep in a man's bed. The thought should have scandalized her. Instead, she felt a sense of liberation so profound it made her dizzy. Quickly, before she could second-guess herself, Olivia moved behind the screen and began to unfasten her dress, wincing as the movement pulled at her bruised ribs. The borrowed clothes were indeed too large. She had to roll the pants several times at the waist and ankles, but the soft, worn fabric felt like a luxury against her skin after the confines of her proper attire. When Rylan returned, he paused in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he took in the sight of her in his clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders. "There's a comb on the shelf by the bed if you want to use it," he said, his voice gruffer than before. "And extra blankets in the trunk if you get cold in the night." "Thank you," Olivia said softly, "for everything. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found your cabin." "You'd have figured something out," he replied with surprising certainty. "You made it this far on your own." His confidence in her abilities, something no one had ever expressed before, warmed her more than the fire. "Still, I'm grateful," Rylan nodded, seeming uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Get some sleep, Miss Blackett. Morning comes early out here." The bed, when Olivia finally lay down in it, was a simple rope frame with a straw-filled mattress covered in clean linens that smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. Despite its humble nature, it felt like the most luxurious bed she'd ever known, simply because she had chosen to lie in it of her own free will. Through the thin curtain that separated the sleeping area from the main room, she could see Rylan's silhouette as he banked the fire for the night and spread his bedroll on the floor. The last thing she remembered before exhaustion claimed her was the surprising sense of safety she felt with this stranger standing guard between her and the world she'd fled. Olivia woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet movement. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was, reaching instinctively for the bell beside her bed to summon the housemaid. When her hand met empty air, the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up with a gasp. "Easy," came Rylan's voice from beyond the curtain. "You're safe." Those two simple words nearly undid her. When had she last felt safe, truly safe, without the constant tension of waiting for her father's mood to shift like quicksand beneath her feet? "What time is it?" she asked, pushing back the blankets and wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. "Just past sunrise," Rylan replied. "Take your time, coffee's hot when you're ready." Olivia found her dress hanging near the bed, the worst of the dirt brushed away and the torn sleeve neatly mended with even stitches that spoke of surprising skill. Her undergarments had been laundered and hung discreetly behind the screen. The thoughtfulness of these gestures brought a lump to her throat. She dressed quickly, deciding to leave off the corset rather than struggle with the laces herself. Her father would have been appalled at such impropriety, which made the small rebellion all the sweeter. After combing her hair and securing it in a simple braid, she emerged from behind the curtain to find Rylan at the stove, frying bacon in a cast-iron skillet. "Good morning," she said, suddenly shy in the clear light of day. He turned, a half-smile lifting one corner of his mouth. "Morning." "Sleep well, better than I have in years," she admitted. "Thank you for mending my dress," Rylan shrugged, turning back to the stove. "My ma taught all her boys to sew, said a man who can't mend his own clothes has no business being on his own." She sounds like a wise woman. She was. The past tense hung in the air for a moment before he continued. "Coffee's there on the table. Milk if you want it, though we're running low." Olivia poured herself a cup, adding just a splash of milk. "You mentioned brothers, 3, all older, all gone now." He said it matter-of-factly, but Olivia sensed a story there, one as painful perhaps as her own. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Rylan nodded in acknowledgement, sliding bacon onto 2 plates and adding a generous portion of beans to each. "Hope you're hungry. Day's work needs fuel." "Day's work." Olivia echoed, accepting the plate he handed her. "Unless you're planning to keep running today," he raised an eyebrow in question. When she hesitated, he continued. "You're welcome to stay another night if you need time to figure out your next move. But I've got chores that won't wait, and an extra pair of hands would be welcome." The idea of staying longer both relieved and worried Olivia. "My father would have to know where to look," Rylan finished for her. "Does he?" She considered this. "No, I never mentioned your ranch." "I doubt anyone in town even knows I've headed this direction." "Then you've got time to catch your breath and make a real plan instead of just running blind." He sat across from her, digging into his breakfast with the efficiency of a man used to eating to live rather than living to eat. Unless you've already got somewhere in mind, the truth was, Olivia hadn't thought beyond escape. Freedom had been such an impossible dream that she'd never allowed herself to consider what might come after. "I don't," she admitted. "I have some money enough to get me to Bozeman perhaps, or Helena. I thought I might find work as a seamstress or a shop girl." Rylan considered this as he ate. "Both decent towns with opportunities," he said, "but Blackett's influence might reach there too, especially if he's as well connected as you say." The thought dampened Olivia's fragile hope. "Then where?" "I can't keep running forever." "No," he agreed, "you can't." He pushed his empty plate aside and leaned forward, his gray eyes intent on hers. "But you can wait him out. Men like your father, they burn hot when crossed." "But that kind of anger takes energy to maintain, especially if the trail goes cold. Give it time and he might convince himself you're not worth the trouble." "You don't know my father," Olivia said bitterly. "He never forgets a slight, never forgives a betrayal." "Maybe not," Rylan conceded. "But winter's coming. Even Lyman Blackett can't command the mountain passes to stay clear of snow. By spring, you'll have had time to establish yourself somewhere new, somewhere far enough away that his reach won't extend." His logic made sense, but something still troubled her. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me. I could be lying about everything." Rylan's expression darkened momentarily. "You're not lying about those bruises or the fear in your eyes when you rode up yesterday." He rose to gather their empty plates. "And like I said, I've seen this story before." Before she could press him further, he changed the subject. "If you're staying the day, those clothes you have won't do for ranch work. I've got some things that might fit you better than what you slept in." Previous owner was a woman, closer to your size. Previous owner. A shadow passed over Rylan's face. "This wasn't always my ranch alone," he said shortly. "Emma's things are in a trunk in the storage shed. Help yourself to whatever fits. No sense in them going to waste." The name Emma and the pain evident in his voice when he said it told Olivia that this was a wound still raw. She didn't press for details. "Thank you. I promise I'll earn my keep today." Rylan's expression lightened. "We'll see about that, city girl." Ranch work isn't like embroidering handkerchiefs. Despite his teasing tone, there was no real mockery in his words, and Olivia found herself smiling back. "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Grayson." "Rylan," he corrected. "And I don't doubt it. You'd have to be to do what you did yesterday." In the storage shed behind the cabin, Olivia found the trunk Rylan had mentioned. Opening it felt like an intrusion into someone else's life, but her practical need outweighed her hesitation. Inside were women's clothes, simple, practical garments made for work rather than show. She selected a brown skirt of sturdy cotton, a cream-colored blouse, and a faded blue apron. The clothes fit well enough, though the previous owner Emma had been slightly taller. As she dressed, Olivia couldn't help wondering about the woman who had worn these clothes before her. A wife, a sister. Whoever she had been, her absence had left a palpable emptiness in Rylan's life and home. When Olivia emerged from the shed, Rylan was in the corral with her mare, checking the animal's hooves. He looked up at her approach, his expression unreadable as he took in her appearance in Emma's clothes. "Better," he said after a moment. "Your horse is fine, just needed rest. She's a good animal." "My mother's," Olivia explained. "One of the few things my father couldn't sell after she died. She'd left specific instructions with the family lawyer that Willow was to be mine alone." Rylan nodded in understanding. "Smart woman, your mother. She tried to protect me in her way," Olivia said softly. "I think she hoped I'd have the courage to leave sooner than I did." "You left when it mattered," Rylan replied. "That's what counts." He gestured toward a nearby paddock where several calves were penned. "I need to check those youngsters for signs of sickness." "Think you can handle feeding the chickens and collecting eggs?" Olivia nodded, oddly eager to prove herself useful. "Just show me what to do." The morning passed in a blur of unfamiliar tasks that left Olivia's muscles aching in new ways, but her mind clearer than it had been in months. There was something deeply satisfying about the straightforward nature of the work: feed animals, collect eggs, weed the small kitchen garden, hang laundry on the line to dry in the warm autumn sun. No one scrutinized her posture or criticized her conversation. No one reminded her of her failings or threatened punishment for imagined slights. By midday, when Rylan called her to the cabin for a simple meal of bread and cold meat, Olivia realized she was smiling a genuine smile that came from somewhere deep inside her, a place she'd thought had withered and died years ago. "You look pleased with yourself," Rylan observed as they sat at the table. "I am," she admitted. "I've never been allowed to do useful work before. It's satisfying." A shadow of anger crossed Rylan's face. "Your father has a lot to answer for." Olivia looked down at her hands, now dirty from honest labor rather than pristine, as her father had always insisted they be. "He believed a lady should be ornamental, not practical, said my only purpose was to make an advantageous marriage that would benefit the Blackett name." "And how would marrying you off to a man old enough to be your father have benefited the mighty Blackett name?" Rylan asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Harold Jenkins owns the largest cattle operation in the territory," Olivia explained. "My father wanted to expand into ranching but lacked the knowledge. A marriage alliance would have given him access to Jenkins' expertise and connections, while giving Jenkins a young wife to replace the one he buried," Rylan finished grimly. "Convenient for everyone except you." "That's how it's always been," Olivia said, surprised by how matter-of-fact she sounded about her own exploitation. "My mother was the daughter of a railroad investor. Her marriage to my father secured his first major loan to start the bank." Rylan's jaw tightened. "Where I come from, that kind of trading in human lives has another name. Slavery," Olivia said quietly. "Yes, I know. My mother used the word once when she thought I couldn't hear. My father struck her for it." For a moment, Rylan looked as if he might put his fist through the wall. Instead, he took a deep breath and visibly calmed himself. "Well, you're free of that now, and while you're here, you'll be treated as a person, not property." The simple declaration nearly brought tears to Olivia's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Rylan seemed embarrassed by her gratitude. "Nothing to thank me for. It's just human decency." He rose from the table. "We should get back to work. Storms brewing to the west want to get the livestock settled before it hits." Together, they spent the afternoon preparing for the approaching weather. Rylan showed Olivia how to secure loose items around the property and explained the importance of checking the cabin roof for leaks. They worked side by side, their movements gradually falling into a natural rhythm that required few words. By the time the first fat raindrops began to fall, they had the animals sheltered and enough firewood stacked on the porch to last through the night. They rushed inside just as the skies opened in earnest, rain drumming on the cabin roof with increasing intensity. "Made it just in time," Rylan said, shaking water from his hat before hanging it on a peg by the door. "Looks like we're in for a real gully washer." Olivia stood by the window, watching the rain transform the yard into a sea of mud. "Will the animals be all right?" "They're snug in the barn," he assured her. "Better off than many folks out here." He moved to the fireplace, stirring the banked coals and adding fresh wood. "Might as well make an early supper. Not much else we can do until this passes." As the storm raged outside, Olivia found herself oddly content in the cozy confines of the cabin. She helped Rylan prepare a simple meal of cornbread and beans with salt pork, learning more about cooking in one evening than she had in her entire sheltered life. The domestic intimacy of sharing these tasks with him felt both foreign and somehow right, as if she'd found a place where she naturally fit. After they'd eaten, Rylan pulled a worn deck of cards from a drawer. "Know how to play poker?" Olivia shook her head. "My father considered cards the devil's playthings." Rylan's mouth quirked in amusement. "Your father and mine might have agreed on that much at least, which is precisely why I learned to play." He began shuffling the deck with practiced ease. "I'll teach you, nothing better to pass a stormy night." As the rain continued to fall, Rylan patiently explained the rules of 5-card draw, demonstrating hands and betting strategies. Olivia proved a quick study, her mind grasping the patterns and probabilities with an ease that clearly surprised him. "You're a natural," he said when she won her third hand in a row. "Good thing we're not playing for money or I'd be in trouble." Olivia laughed, the sound surprising her with its freedom. "Perhaps there are advantages to a misspent youth after all." "Is that what you think I had?" Rylan asked, his tone light but his eyes watchful. Didn't you? She countered. You know cards, you live alone in the wilderness, you take in strange women without hesitation, all signs of a man who hasn't followed the straight and narrow. A genuine smile spread across Rylan's face. Fair enough, though I'd argue that the straight and narrow isn't always the right path. I'm beginning to think the same, Olivia admitted. Everything I was taught to value propriety, obedience, social standing, what did any of it get me but misery? Society has a way of making rules that benefit those already in power, Rylan said, dealing another hand. Your father, for instance. Olivia nodded, examining her cards. And yours, was he a powerful man too? Rylan's expression darkened. In his own domain, yes. Not like your father, we never had money or position, but on our farm in Missouri, his word was law. And he enforced it with the same methods Lyman Blackett seems to favor. The quiet admission created a bond between them, a shared understanding that went beyond words. Olivia reached across the table on impulse, briefly touching Rylan's hand. I'm sorry. He turned his hand over, capturing her fingers in a gentle grasp before releasing them. Long time ago now, I left when I was 17 after he put my older brother in the ground. He killed your brother. Olivia whispered, horrified. Not directly, Rylan clarified, his voice flat. Beat him so badly he couldn't work for weeks. Infection set in. By the time we got the doctor, it was too late. He stared at his cards without seeing them. I left that night, never went back. What about your other brothers, already gone by then? Joseph joined the Union Army in '61, never came home. Matthew headed west after the war, lost track of him somewhere in Colorado, and after Thomas died. He trailed off, then visibly pulled himself together. Well, that's ancient history now. But Olivia could see it wasn't not really. The past had shaped Rylan Grayson just as surely as her own history had molded her. Perhaps that was why he had recognized her situation so quickly and offered help without question. He knew what it was to flee from cruelty. Thank you for telling me, she said softly. Rylan nodded once in acknowledgement, then deliberately lightened his tone. Now, are you going to bet on those cards, or have you finally got a hand too poor to bluff with? The game continued, their conversation shifting to less painful topics. Rylan told stories of his early days in Montana Territory, learning ranching from the ground up. Olivia shared memories of her mother's quiet acts of rebellion, secret reading lessons when her father thought she was teaching Olivia needlework, coded messages in the embroidery patterns they created together. Outside, the storm gradually subsided, rain giving way to the gentle patter of dripping eaves. Inside, something new was forming between two wounded souls, a tenuous trust that neither had expected to find. When they finally turned in for the night, Olivia again taking the bed while Rylan slept on the floor beyond the curtain. She lay awake listening to the rhythm of his breathing and wondering at the strange twist of fate that had led her to his door. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt the stirring of hope not just for escape, but for a life worth living. Morning brought clear skies and a transformed landscape. The storm had washed everything clean, and the world seemed to sparkle with renewed life. Olivia stepped onto the porch as the sun rose, drawing in a deep breath of pine-scented air and feeling, improbably, like she too had been cleansed of old pain. Rylan emerged from the barn, leading a saddled horse. He stopped when he saw her, raising a hand in greeting before continuing toward the cabin. Early riser, he observed as he reached the porch. The sunrise was too beautiful to miss, she replied, then nodded toward the horse. Are you going somewhere? Need to check the south pasture for strays after that storm. Some of the younger cattle get spooked by thunder and break through fencing. He hesitated, then added, Thought you might want to come along. Your mare could use the exercise, and it's a fine day for riding. The invitation sent a surprising thrill through Olivia. I'd like that very much. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, Olivia marveling at the vastness of the landscape spread before them. Her life in Fairhaven had been confined to the town's narrow streets and her father's house. Even her rides had been restricted to carefully supervised outings along prescribed routes. This wild freedom to simply point her horse in a direction and go, with no one to answer to but herself, was intoxicating. Rylan rode slightly ahead, occasionally pointing out landmarks or naming plants and wildlife they encountered. He was a natural teacher, patient and clear in his explanations, and Olivia found herself absorbing knowledge eagerly. "What made you choose ranching?" she asked as they paused atop a rise overlooking a stream where several of Rylan's cattle were drinking. He considered the question as he scanned the herd, counting heads. "Wasn't much for mining or town life. Tried my hand at trapping for a few years, but it's a lonely existence." He glanced at her. "I like working with animals. They don't judge you for your past or your name. Just for how you treat them." "Unlike people," Olivia said with understanding. "Some people," Rylan amended. "Others can surprise you." His gaze lingered on her face for a moment before he turned his attention back to the cattle. "Looks like we're missing 2 calves and one of the yearlings. Let's head down to that stand of cottonwoods. They sometimes shelter there during storms." They found the missing cattle exactly where Rylan had predicted, the animals unharmed but reluctant to leave their sheltered spot. Working together, they managed to drive the strays back toward the main herd, Olivia surprising herself with her quick grasp of the techniques Rylan demonstrated. "You're a natural," he said as they watched the reunited herd begin to graze peacefully. "Most city folk never get the hang of it." His praise warmed her more than it should have. "I've always been good with animals," she said. "When I was little, before my mother died, we had a small menagerie, 2 cats, a dog, even a tame crow that would come when called. My father got rid of them all after she was gone." Said pets were a frivolous expense. "Man seems determined to strip all joy from life," Rylan commented, "his own and everyone else's. He believes joy is a distraction from duty," Olivia explained, "and that a man's or woman's only purpose is to improve their position in the world." "And what do you believe?" Rylan asked, turning in his saddle to study her. The question caught Olivia off guard. No one had ever asked for her beliefs before. I'm not sure," she admitted. "For so long, I just tried to survive each day. I didn't allow myself to think about what I might want if I were free to choose." "And now that you are free to choose," Olivia looked out at the vast Montana landscape, the distant mountains and rolling prairie, the clear blue sky arching overhead. I think I want a life with meaning. Not position or wealth, but purpose. I want to create something good, something that helps rather than hurts. I want." She hesitated, then finished in a rush. "I want to never be afraid again." Rylan's expression softened. "That's a worthy aim, and more possible than you might think." He gestured toward a distant ridge. "Want to see something special?" Curious, Olivia nodded, and they set off at an easy trot. As they crested the ridge, Olivia gasped in delight. Below them stretched a hidden valley, lush with late summer wildflowers and bisected by a clear stream that pooled into a small lake at the far end. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "My favorite spot on the ranch," Rylan said, dismounting and tying his horse to a nearby sapling. "Found it my first week here. Somehow the previous owner never mentioned it." Olivia slid from her saddle, accepting Rylan's steadying hand. "Who did you buy the ranch from?" A shadow crossed his face. "Didn't exactly buy it," he said after a moment. "Inherited it, you might say." Before she could ask what he meant, Rylan was leading the way down a narrow path into the valley. Olivia followed, questions momentarily forgotten as she took in the natural beauty surrounding them. Butterflies danced among the wildflowers, and somewhere nearby a meadowlark trilled its distinctive song. At the edge of the lake, Rylan stopped and turned to face her. "This is what freedom looks like to me," he said, gesturing to the untouched landscape. "No one telling me what to do or how to live, just the land and the sky and the work of my own hands." Olivia understood perfectly. "It's paradise," she said softly. "Can be," Rylan agreed. "Can also be harsh and unforgiving, winter storms that freeze a man solid if he's caught unprepared. Summer droughts that kill crops and starve cattle, spring floods that wash away months of work in hours." His eyes held hers. "Freedom comes with responsibility to yourself and to whatever you create out here." "Is that why you're alone?" The question slipped out before Olivia could stop it. Because of the responsibility. For a long moment, Rylan was silent, his gaze turning toward the distant mountains. I wasn't always alone, he finally said. Emma, my wife, she died 2 winters ago. Fever took her before I could get her to town. The admission explained so much: the woman's clothes, the careful maintenance of the cabin, the shadows that sometimes crossed Rylan's face. I'm so sorry, Olivia said, meaning it deeply. We were married 3 years, Rylan continued, as if a dam had broken inside him. Met in Virginia City. She was a widow running a boarding house. I was just passing through, wasn't looking for anything permanent. A small, sad smile touched his lips. Emma had other ideas, said she knew the first time she saw me that I was meant to be hers. She sounds remarkable, Olivia said gently. She was. Strongest person I ever knew. Followed me out here when I decided to try ranching, helped build that cabin with her own hands. He picked up a stone and skipped it across the lake's surface. Always said we'd fill it with children someday. The grief in his voice was palpable, a living thing that reached out and wrapped around Olivia's heart. Without thinking, she touched his arm, a gesture of comfort that felt both presumptuous and necessary. Rylan looked down at her hand, then covered it with his own. Sorry, he said gruffly. Don't usually talk about her. Don't apologize, Olivia replied. I'm honored that you would share her memory with me. They stood like that for a long moment, connected by touch and by the shared understanding of loss. Then, as if by mutual agreement, they turned and began walking along the lakeshore, Rylan pointing out beaver dams and fish jumping in the clear water. The rest of the day passed in similar fashion, work interspersed with conversation that gradually deepened, revealing more of themselves to each other. By the time they returned to the cabin in the late afternoon, Olivia felt as though she'd known Rylan Grayson for years rather than days. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Olivia found herself thinking about the future. Her original plan to reach Bozeman or Helena and find work suddenly seemed hollow. The thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Rylan, created an unexpected ache in her chest. Penny for your thoughts, Rylan said, breaking the comfortable silence. Olivia smiled. I'm not sure they're worth that much. Try me. She took a deep breath. I was thinking about what comes next. For me, I mean. Rylan's expression remained neutral, but she noticed his hands tighten slightly on the arms of his chair. And what did you decide? That's just it, I haven't decided, she admitted. Everything feels different now. The plans I made when I was running seem inadequate somehow. How so? Olivia struggled to articulate the shift in her perspective. Before, I was just thinking about escape, about getting away from my father and the life he planned for me, but now. She gestured toward the expansive view before them. Now I'm thinking about what I'm running toward, not just what I'm running from, Rylan nodded slowly. That's good, means you're starting to see yourself as having a future, not just a past. Yes, exactly. She turned to face him directly. But I don't know what that future looks like yet. And I don't want to impose on your hospitality while I figure it out. You're not imposing, Rylan said firmly. Truth is, you've been a help these past days. Ranch this size, there's always more work than one person can handle. He hesitated, then added, you could stay on a while if you wanted. At least until winter sets in. The offer sent a surge of warmth through Olivia. Are you sure? I don't want to be a burden. Wouldn't offer if I didn't mean it, Rylan replied. You can earn your keep helping with the ranch work, and, he paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. And I've enjoyed the company. Gets quiet out here, especially when the snow comes. It was as close to an admission of loneliness as he was likely to make, and Olivia understood what it cost him. Then I accept, she said, smiling, at least until winter. Something like relief crossed Rylan's face. Good, he said simply. But in that one word, Olivia heard much more. The days that followed fell into a pattern that felt increasingly natural. Mornings began with shared breakfast and division of the day's tasks. Olivia quickly proved herself capable of handling the smaller livestock, chickens, pigs, and the milk cow, while Rylan focused on the cattle and horses. Afternoons often found them working side by side on repairs to fences, the barn, or the cabin itself. Evenings were for quiet conversation, card games, or simply sitting in companionable silence. Rylan began teaching Olivia to read the few books he owned, mostly practical guides to ranching and animal husbandry, but also a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets that had belonged to Emma. She loved poetry, Rylan explained as he handed Olivia the small volume, said it reminded her that there was beauty in the world, even in the hardest times. Olivia ran her fingers over the well-thumbed pages. My mother felt the same. She used to recite verses to me at night after my father had gone to his study. Said poems were like little spells that could transport us somewhere better. Rylan smiled at that. Emma would have liked your mother, I think. I think so too. Olivia opened the book to a random page and began to read aloud, her voice giving life to words of love and longing that seemed to fill the small cabin with their power. When she finished, she looked up to find Rylan watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, something electric passed between them, an awareness that transcended their growing friendship. Then Rylan cleared his throat and rose from his chair. "It's getting late," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "We should turn in. Early start tomorrow." That night, Olivia lay awake long after Rylan's breathing had evened into sleep, trying to make sense of her confusing emotions. In just over a week, this man and this place had come to mean more to her than she could have imagined possible. The thought of eventually leaving as she must, if she truly wanted to escape her father's reach, was becoming increasingly painful. But what alternative was there? She couldn't stay forever, living in this strange limbo of not quite guest, not quite partner. And even if Rylan's kindness suggested he might welcome a deeper connection, what right did she have to intrude on the memory of the wife he still clearly mourned? These thoughts chased each other through Olivia's mind until exhaustion finally claimed her. Her dreams, when they came, were a confused tangle of past and present: her father's rage, her mother's gentle hands, Rylan's steady presence offering protection from the storm. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with a hint of chill that spoke of autumn's deepening hold. Olivia rose early, dressing in the now familiar work clothes that had once belonged to Emma. As she pinned up her hair, she heard Rylan moving about in the main room and smiled at the domestic familiarity of it. But when she emerged from behind the curtain, she found him standing by the door, his expression grim. "What's wrong?" she asked, immediately concerned. "Riders coming," he said tersely. 3 of them from the direction of Fairhaven. Fear shot through Olivia like lightning. "My father." "Can't tell yet, but whoever they are, they're in a hurry." Rylan reached for his rifle, checking that it was loaded. "Stay inside while I see what they want." "No," Olivia said, surprising herself with her firmness. "If it's my father, I won't hide like a child. I left of my own free will, and I'll face him standing on my own 2 feet. Rylan studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but stay behind me until we know who we're dealing with." Together they stepped onto the porch just as the riders came into clear view. Olivia's heart sank as she recognized the lead figure, not her father, but Harold Jenkins, the man she'd been promised to in marriage. Flanking him were 2 younger men she didn't know, both armed and looking grim. "That's Jenkins," she whispered to Rylan. "The man my father arranged for me to marry." Rylan's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral as the riders approached. They stopped a respectful distance from the cabin, Jenkins raising a hand in greeting. "Morning," he called. "This the Grayson Ranch?" "It is," Rylan replied evenly. "What can I do for you gentlemen?" Jenkins's gaze shifted to Olivia, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes spread across his weather-beaten face. "Miss Blackett, your father's been mighty worried about you." Olivia lifted her chin, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I doubt that very much, Mr. Jenkins. More likely he's worried about the money I took and the embarrassment my departure caused him." Jenkins chuckled, though there was no humor in the sound. "Sharp tongue on this one," he said to Rylan, as if Olivia weren't present. "Part of her charm, I suppose, though it'll need tempering once we're married." "There won't be any marriage," Olivia stated firmly. "I've left Fairhaven for good." Jenkins's expression hardened. "Now, Miss Blackett, let's not be hasty. Your father and I have an understanding." The wedding's been arranged, guests invited. Quite an inconvenience you've caused with this little adventure of yours." "The lady's made her position clear," Rylan interjected, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "I suggest you respect it." Jenkins's attention shifted fully to Rylan, assessing him with cold calculation. "And who might you be to interfere in family matters, Mr. Rylan Grayson? This is my land you're on, and Miss Blackett is under my protection while she's here." The two men with Jenkins shifted in their saddles, hands drifting closer to their weapons. Tension crackled in the air like static before a storm. "Protection," Jenkins repeated, making the words sound dirty. "I see." "Well, Mr. Grayson, I should inform you that Lyman Blackett has legally appointed me guardian of his daughter until our wedding. She's been declared mentally unstable, you see, prone to flights of fancy and irrational behavior." Shock and outrage flooded through Olivia. "That's a lie." "Got the papers right here, signed by Judge Hollister himself," Jenkins said, patting his breast pocket. "So you see, I have every right to take her back, by force if necessary." He nodded to his companions. "These gentlemen are deputies from Fairhaven, here to assist me." Ryland's expression didn't change, but Olivia felt him tense beside her. "Those papers have no authority here," he said flatly. "This is Granite County, not Fairhaven, different jurisdiction." "Maybe so," Jenkins conceded, "but we both know the territorial courts will back me in the end." "Save yourself some trouble, Grayson. Hand the girl over and we'll forget we found her here." "The girl is a grown woman capable of making her own decisions," Rylan countered, "and she's decided not to marry you." Jenkins's false affability vanished, revealing the hard, cruel man beneath. "Don't be a fool, Grayson. You're outnumbered, and Blackett's influence reaches further than you might think. This doesn't have to get ugly." "It already is ugly," Olivia spoke up, stepping forward to stand beside Rylan rather than behind him. "Using false claims of mental instability to force a woman into marriage against her will, I call that more than ugly, I call it criminal." For a moment, genuine surprise flickered across Jenkins's face at her boldness. Then his expression darkened. "You'll regret that kind of talk when we're married, girl. I don't tolerate disrespect from women." "All the more reason she won't be marrying you," Rylan said, his rifle now held ready but not yet aimed. "I'm going to ask you once politely to leave my property. What happens next is up to you." The two deputies exchanged nervous glances, clearly not having expected armed resistance. Jenkins, however, merely smiled thinly. "Have it your way, Grayson." He turned his horse, gesturing for his men to do the same. "But this isn't over, not by a long shot." Olivia and Rylan watched in tense silence as the three riders departed, not relaxing until they had disappeared over the ridge. "They'll be back," Rylan said grimly, lowering his rifle. "Probably with more men." Fear threatened to overwhelm Olivia, but she fought it down. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've brought trouble to your door." Rylan turned to her, his expression softening. "You've got nothing to be sorry for. Jenkins is the one who should be apologizing to you for thinking he could claim you like a piece of property. But what do we do now?" "If my father has truly obtained those papers." "First, we don't know if those papers even exist," Rylan pointed out. "Could be a bluff. And second, I meant what I said about jurisdiction. Fairhaven's sheriff has no authority here." "But the territorial courts would take weeks, maybe months to process any petition," Rylan finished. "By which time winter will have closed the passes, making travel between here and Fairhaven nearly impossible until spring." Olivia considered this, hope warring with worry. "So we have time." "We do," Rylan confirmed, "but we also need to be prepared. Jenkins doesn't strike me as the type to give up easily, especially with your father backing him." "What are you suggesting?" Rylan ran a hand through his hair, thinking. "For now, we stay alert." "I'll ride into town tomorrow, talk to our local sheriff, make him aware of the situation. And we should consider moving you somewhere less obvious if they return." "Where?" Olivia asked, trying to imagine where she could hide that would be safe from her father's reach. "I've got a line shack about 5 miles north of here, up in the foothills. It's basic, but it would be secure, only one trail in, easy to defend if necessary." Rylan hesitated, then added, "Or there's another option." What's that? We could get married. The words hung in the air between them, startling in their directness. Olivia stared at Rylan, certain she had misheard. Married, she echoed faintly. Rylan's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. It would give you legal protection that even your father couldn't easily override. A husband's rights supersede a father's in the eyes of the law. You're proposing marriage as a legal strategy. Olivia wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry at the absurdity of it. It would be a practical arrangement, Rylan continued, his voice steady but his eyes avoiding hers now. On paper only, of course. You'd have the protection of my name and home for as long as you needed it. Once your father gives up his pursuit, or you decide where you want to settle permanently, we could quietly obtain an annulment. A practical arrangement, on paper only. The words stung in ways Olivia hadn't expected. I see, she said, fighting to keep her voice even. And what would you get from this arrangement, Mr. Grayson? Now Rylan did meet her gaze, something flickering in his eyes that she couldn't quite name. Peace of mind knowing you're safe, and… He hesitated, then admitted quietly, and the company for a while. As I said before, it gets lonely out here. It was an honest answer, if incomplete. Olivia sensed there was more he wasn't saying, but pride kept her from pressing. I appreciate the offer, she said carefully, but I can't accept marriage, even one of convenience, as a solution. It would make me no better than my father or Jenkins, using you for protection just as they tried to use me for their own ends. Rylan nodded, accepting her decision without argument. Fair enough. The offer stands if you change your mind. In the meantime, we'll work with the other options. Thank you, Olivia said softly, not just for the offer, but for respecting my choice. Something like sadness crossed Rylan's face. Your choices are yours alone, Olivia. I wouldn't have it any other way. The rest of the day passed in subdued activity, both of them aware of the new tension between them and the threat lingering just over the horizon. They worked separately for most of the afternoon, Rylan mending tack in the barn, Olivia preserving the last of the garden's vegetables for winter storage. By evening, however, the practical necessities of survival had brought them back together. As they sat down to a simple supper, Rylan outlined his plan for the next day. I'll ride into Granite City first thing, speak with Sheriff Tanner. He's a good man, not likely to be swayed by Blackett's money or influence. Once he knows the situation, he can keep an eye out for Jenkins and his men if they try to return with reinforcements. Olivia nodded, picking at her food without much appetite. And if they come while you're gone, take my rifle and hide in the root cellar, Rylan said firmly. There's a false wall at the back that leads to a small space just big enough for a person. Emma and I built it when we first settled here, after some trouble with claim jumpers. The mention of Emma reminded Olivia of her earlier thoughts of Rylan's continued grief for his wife and her own uncertain position in his life. The marriage proposal, practical as it had been framed, complicated things further. Rylan, she began hesitantly, about what you suggested earlier. You don't need to say anything more, he interrupted gently. It was just an idea, nothing more. I understand why you wouldn't want to tie yourself to a stranger, even temporarily. But that wasn't it at all, Olivia realized. The problem wasn't that Rylan was a stranger, it was that he was becoming something far more important to her, something she scarcely dared name even in the privacy of her own thoughts. You're not a stranger, she said softly. Not anymore. Rylan looked up from his plate, his gray eyes searching her face. No, he agreed after a moment. I suppose we're not strangers, but that doesn't change the fact that you deserve better than a marriage of convenience to a rough rancher with nothing much to offer. Nothing much to offer. Olivia repeated incredulously. You've given me shelter when I had nowhere to go. You've taught me skills I never knew I needed. You've shown me kindness without expecting anything in return. That's more than anyone has offered me in years. It's just basic decency, Rylan insisted, echoing his words from days earlier. Nothing special about that. But it is special, Olivia countered, surprising herself with her vehemence. In a world where men like my father and Harold Jenkins Exist men who see women as property to be traded and controlled. A man who treats a woman as a person with her own mind and will is very special indeed. A flush of color rose in Ryland's cheeks, and he looked away, clearly uncomfortable with her praise. You've had a hard road, Olivia, makes ordinary decency look extraordinary by comparison. His stubborn refusal to accept her gratitude ignited a spark of frustration in Olivia. Why is it so difficult for you to believe you might be worthy of admiration? Of affection? The word hung between them, more revealing than she had intended. Ryland's gaze snapped back to her face, his expression a mixture of disbelief and something that might have been hope. Olivia, he said, her name a caution and a question. I'm not proposing we marry for convenience, she clarified quickly, heat rising in her own cheeks now. I'm just saying that you matter to me, that these days here with you have meant something. And if circumstances were different? If circumstances were different, Rylan repeated slowly, what then? Olivia took a deep breath, gathering her courage. If I weren't running from my father, if you weren't still grieving Emma, if we had met under normal circumstances. I think I could very easily. She faltered, then finished in a rush. I think I could very easily fall in love with you. The admission seemed to steal the air from the room. Rylan sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Then, with a deliberate movement, he rose from his chair and came around the table to stand before her. Olivia, he said again, but this time her name was spoken with a tenderness that made her heart race. Look at me. She raised her eyes to his, afraid of what she might see, pity perhaps, or gentle rejection. Instead, she found a warmth that took her breath away. I will always grieve for Emma, Rylan said quietly. She was my wife and I loved her, but grief changes over time. It doesn't stay that raw, open wound forever. He reached out, tentatively touching Olivia's cheek with calloused fingers. These past days with you, they've reminded me that there can be life after loss, that the heart doesn't just stop because it's been broken. Hope bloomed in Olivia's chest, fragile but insistent. What are you saying? I'm saying that if circumstances were different, Rylan answered, a small smile touching his lips, I wouldn't have suggested a marriage of convenience. I would have courted you properly, called on you in town, brought you flowers, asked permission to walk out with you on Sundays. That sounds lovely, Olivia whispered, but also entirely unnecessary. Rylan's smile widened. Is that so? I already know the kind of man you are, she explained. I've seen you with your animals, with your land. I've watched you work from sunup to sundown without complaint. I've witnessed your kindness and your strength. What more could any courtship show me? For a long moment they stood in silence, the air between them charged with possibility. Then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Rylan bent his head and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, almost reverent in its restraint, but it sent waves of warmth cascading through Olivia's body. She had been kissed before awkward, stolen moments with boys from town that had left her more confused than enlightened, but never like this. Never with this sense of rightness of coming home. When they finally parted, Rylan rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. I'm not offering marriage as a legal strategy anymore, he said softly, but the offer still stands for entirely different reasons. Olivia closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the rush of emotions. Rylan, a distant sound interrupted her, the unmistakable thunder of approaching horses. Many horses, Rylan straightened, instantly alert. Get to the root cellar, he ordered, all tenderness gone from his voice. Now, but go, Olivia, please. The fear in his eyes convinced her where his command had not. Olivia grabbed the rifle he'd indicated earlier and hurried to the trapdoor that led to the root cellar. As she descended the rough wooden steps, she heard Rylan moving about above, presumably arming himself and preparing to face whoever was approaching. The root cellar was cool and dark, smelling of earth and the vegetables stored there. Olivia felt her way to the back wall, finding the false panel Rylan had described. It swung open silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing a space just large enough for a person to crouch in concealment. She slipped inside, pulling the panel closed behind her and clutching the rifle to her chest. Through the thin wooden walls of the cabin, She could hear the rumble of horses drawing nearer, then stopping. Male voices called out, though she couldn't make out the words. Then Rylan's voice, steady and clear. "This is private property, state your business." What followed was a jumble of sounds, more voices, growing heated, the thud of boots on the porch. Then, suddenly, a sharp crack that Olivia recognized with horror as a gunshot. Panic seized her. Had Rylan been hit? Was he lying wounded or worse while she cowered in hiding? The thought was unbearable. Before she could think better of it, Olivia pushed open the false panel and crept toward the cellar steps, rifle ready. As she reached the top of the stairs, she could hear voices, more clearly Jenkins's distinctive drawl, and another, older voice that sent ice through her veins. Her father. "Search the place," Rylan Blackett commanded. "She's here somewhere." "Your daughter isn't here," came Rylan's voice, tight with pain but very much alive. Relief washed through Olivia, followed immediately by renewed fear as she realized what must have happened. Rylan had been shot but was still conscious, still trying to protect her. "You're lying," her father spat. "The horse in your corral belongs to the Blackett stable. You think I wouldn't recognize my own stock?" "The horse came here," Rylan replied steadily. "The rider moved on days ago. Headed for Canada," she said. There was a sound of movement, then a grunt of pain that had to be Rylan. "Let's try this again," Jenkins said, his voice cold. "Where is Olivia?" Silence, then another sound of impact and a bitten-off cry. Olivia couldn't bear it. They were hurting Rylan, hurting him to protect her. Without conscious thought, she pushed open the trapdoor and emerged into the cabin, rifle raised. "Stop," she commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "Leave him alone." The scene before her froze. Rylan on his knees, blood seeping from a wound in his left shoulder, Jenkins standing over him with a pistol. Her father by the door, flanked by 4 rough-looking men she didn't recognize. All eyes turned to her in shock. "Olivia," her father said, recovering first. "Put that gun down before you hurt yourself." "The only one who's going to get hurt is the next man who touches Rylan," she replied, keeping the rifle trained on Jenkins. "Back away from him, now." To her surprise, Jenkins actually took a step back, though his pistol remained pointed at Rylan's head. "Feisty little thing, isn't she?" he remarked to her father. "Told you she needed a firm hand." "Olivia," Rylan said through gritted teeth, "get out of here, run." "I'm not leaving you," she said without taking her eyes off Jenkins. Rylan Blackett stepped forward, his face a mask of cold fury. "This farce has gone on long enough. You're coming home, Olivia. The wagon is outside and your things are already packed. Jenkins and I have come to an understanding. The wedding will take place as soon as we return to Fairhaven." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Olivia stated firmly, "and I'm certainly not marrying that man." Her father's expression hardened further. "You have no choice. I am your father, and until you are legally wed, you are under my authority. The judge has already ruled on the matter." "Based on lies," Olivia shot back. "You told them I was mentally unstable, a convenient explanation for why your daughter would rather flee into the wilderness than endure another day under your roof." "You are unstable," her father insisted. "Look at yourself dressed in men's clothing, pointing a weapon at respectable citizens consorting with." He glanced contemptuously at Rylan. "With this ruffian? This ruffian has shown me more kindness in 2 weeks than you have in my entire life," Olivia said, anger making her voice shake. "He treats me like a person, not a possession," Jenkins chuckled. "Is that what you call it, kindness? Looks to me like he's been enjoying more than just your company, Blackett. Your daughter's virtue might not be as intact as advertised." The implication sent rage coursing through Olivia. "How dare you?" she began, but her father cut her off. "Enough," Rylan Blackett snapped. "Jenkins, take that rifle from her. The rest of you, secure Grayson. We're leaving." Jenkins moved toward Olivia, confident in his ability to overpower her. It was the opening Rylan had been waiting for. Despite his wounded shoulder, he lunged upward, tackling Jenkins around the knees and sending both men crashing to the floor. The pistol went skittering across the wooden planks. "Run, Olivia," Rylan shouted as he grappled with the larger man. Instead, Olivia aimed the rifle at the ceiling and fired, the deafening report bringing everyone to a startled halt. The next shot, she said into the ringing silence, won't be aimed at the ceiling. Now all of you back away from Rylan and drop your weapons. To her amazement, the hired men actually hesitated, looking to her father for direction. Rylan Blackett's face had gone purple with rage. Do you think this changes anything? He demanded. Even if you drive us off today, we'll be back tomorrow with the law on our side. You can't hide up here forever. She won't have to, came a new voice from the doorway. Sheriff Tanner of Granite City stood there, flanked by 3 deputies, all with weapons drawn. Rylan Blackett, Harold Jenkins, you're both under arrest for trespassing, assault, and attempted kidnapping. Relief made Olivia's knees weak, but she kept the rifle steady. Sheriff, she acknowledged with a nod, your timing is impeccable. Got word from a neighbor that a group of armed men was headed this way, Tanner explained, his weathered face grim as he took in the scene. Seems we arrived just in time, he gestured to his deputies. Disarm these men and get them outside. This is outrageous, Rylan Blackett blustered as a deputy relieved him of his pistol. I have legal documents granting me guardianship of my daughter. She is mentally unsound and requires supervision. Those documents, if they exist, have no standing in Granite County, Tanner replied coolly. And from what I can see, the only unsound minds here belong to men who'd shoot an unarmed rancher and threaten a woman with forced marriage. He turned to Olivia. Miss Blackett, I'd be grateful if you'd lower that rifle now. My men have the situation under control. Olivia complied, setting the weapon aside and rushing to Rylan's side as the deputies began removing her father and his men from the cabin. Rylan was pale from blood loss but conscious, his gray eyes fixed on her face. You should have run, he murmured as she helped him to a chair, and leave you to face them alone. Never. She began examining his wound, relieved to find that the bullet had passed clean through the fleshy part of his shoulder without hitting bone. Besides, I'm through with running. Sheriff Tanner approached as she began tearing strips from her apron to bandage the wound. Mr. Grayson, Miss Blackett, I'll need statements from both of you once we've got these men secured, and you'll need to come into town, file formal charges. Of course, Olivia agreed, but Rylan needs medical attention first. Doc Evans is with us, Tanner said. I'll send him in. He hesitated, then added in a softer tone, Miss Blackett, your father made some accusations about your relationship with Mr. Grayson. Ordinarily, I wouldn't pry into private matters, but given the circumstances. My relationship with Mr. Grayson is above reproach, Sheriff, Olivia stated firmly. He offered me shelter when I was in need, nothing more. It wasn't entirely true anymore, but the tender feelings developing between them were too new, too precious to be exposed to public scrutiny. Tanner nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good enough for me, I'll send the doc in. Once they were alone again, Rylan reached up with his good arm to touch Olivia's cheek. You were magnificent, he said softly. Standing up to them like that, never seen anything braver. Olivia leaned into his touch, tears threatening to spill over. I was terrified, she admitted. When I heard that gunshot, I thought they'd killed you. Takes more than one bullet to bring me down, Rylan assured her with a weak smile, though I'd prefer not to test that theory further. A laugh bubbled up through Olivia's tears. Agreed. She sobered quickly, glancing toward the door where her father had been taken. What happens now? Now, Rylan said, wincing as he shifted in the chair, your father and Jenkins face charges, assault with a deadly weapon at minimum. They'll spend some time in the Granite City jail while the territorial judge is summoned. Could be weeks before he arrives, especially with winter coming on. And after that, Olivia pressed, even if they're convicted, they won't be imprisoned forever. My father will never stop trying to control me, to punish me for defying him. Rylan's expression grew serious. That's why, once I'm patched up, we're going to ride into town and do something else important. What's that? Get married. When Olivia's eyes widened, he hastened to add, not for convenience or protection, though those are benefits, but because I love you, Olivia Blackett. These past weeks have shown me what life could be like with you by my side, brighter, fuller, more purposeful than I ever imagined possible after Emma died. Joy and disbelief warred within Olivia. You love me. With everything I am, Rylan confirmed, his eyes never leaving hers. And if you'll have me wounded shoulder, modest ranch, and all I promise to spend the rest of my days making sure you never have cause to be afraid again. Tears spilled freely down Olivia's cheeks now, but they were tears of happiness. Yes, she whispered, leaning forward to press her forehead against his. Yes, I'll marry you, Rylan Grayson, not for protection or convenience, but because I love you too. Their lips met in a kiss that sealed the promise between them, a promise of partnership, of respect, of love freely given and joyfully received. Outside, the sounds of the law taking charge of her past faded into insignificance compared to the beating of their hearts, united in purpose and in hope for the future they would build together. 3 days later, in the simple wooden church in Granite City, Olivia Blackett became Olivia Grayson in a ceremony attended by Sheriff Tanner, Doc Evans, and a handful of neighbors who had rallied around the couple after hearing their story. Rylan, his arm in a sling but his eyes bright with happiness, promised to love, honor, and cherish Olivia for all his days. Olivia, wearing a borrowed dress and her mother's silver locket, promised the same in return. From the jailhouse 2 streets away, Lyman Blackett could hear the church bells ringing to celebrate the union he had fought so hard to prevent. His influence, so powerful in Fairhaven, meant nothing here in Granite City, where Judge Hollister's questionable ruling was being formally investigated, and where witnesses had come forward to testify about years of abuse suffered by both Olivia and her mother. For Olivia, the sound of those bells represented more than just her marriage. They heralded the definitive end of her old life and the joyful beginning of a new one. As she and Rylan rode back to their ranch that evening, her hand securely held in his, she felt a sense of peace and rightness that she had never known before. "Mrs. Grayson," Rylan said as they crested the rise that overlooked their home, "welcome to the rest of our lives." Olivia smiled, leaning against her husband's strong shoulder. "It's beautiful," she said, meaning not just the land spread before them, but the future they would share upon it. And as the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of promise, Olivia knew that she had found not just escape from cruelty, but a love that would sustain her through whatever challenges lay ahead. With Rylan beside her, she was no longer running from her past, she was running toward her future, a future brighter than she had ever dared to dream. Spring came to the Montana Territory in a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. The harsh winter that had isolated the Grayson Ranch for months had finally released its grip, leaving behind a landscape transformed by renewal and possibility. Olivia stood on the porch of the cabin, expanded now by 2 additional rooms that she and Rylan had built together during the long winter evenings, and breathed in the scent of warming earth and fresh growth. Her hand rested lightly on her swelling abdomen, where their first child grew stronger each day. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the path leading from town. Rylan appeared over the rise, his tall figure a welcome sight after 3 days away. He had ridden to Granite City for supplies and news, leaving Olivia in the capable hands of their nearest neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, who had become both friend and mentor to the young bride. As Rylan dismounted and secured his horse, Olivia noted the extra packet tied to his saddle mail, a rare treat this far from civilization. Her heart quickened with both anticipation and apprehension. News from the outside world could be either blessing or threat. "Welcome home," she called, descending the porch steps to meet him. Rylan's face broke into the smile he reserved solely for her, open, unguarded, full of a love that still took her breath away after 6 months of marriage. "Missed you," he said simply, gathering her into his arms and kissing her with a thoroughness that suggested 3 days had been far too long a separation. When they finally parted, Olivia nodded toward the packet on his saddle. "News, some," Rylan confirmed, his expression turning more serious. "Let's go inside." In the warm kitchen that had become the heart of their home, Rylan unpacked not just supplies but the latest information from Granite City and beyond. Sheriff Tanner sent his regards and a wedding gift belatedly delivered of a fine wool blanket woven by his wife. The territorial judge had finally ruled on her father's case, sentencing Rylan Blackett and Harold Jenkins to 6 months in prison for assault and attempted kidnapping. "Only 6 months?" Olivia asked, disappointment evident in her voice. "It's something," Rylan said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "And there's more." The judge also granted a permanent injunction, barring both men from coming within 50 miles of Granite County or attempting to contact you in any way. Relief flooded through Olivia. "So they can't come back, they can't try again." "Not legally, no," Rylan agreed, "and Blackett's reputation has taken a serious hit." According to Tanner, several prominent citizens of Fairhaven have withdrawn their business from his bank after hearing testimony about his treatment of you and your mother. It wasn't justice. Not really nothing could fully account for the years of pain and fear her father had inflicted. But it was closure of a sort, and the knowledge that he had faced at least some consequences for his actions brought Olivia a measure of peace. "There's something else," Rylan continued, pulling a letter from his pocket. "This came for you from Bozeman." Curious, Olivia accepted the envelope. She knew no one in Bozeman, had never even visited the town. The letter was addressed simply to Mrs. Olivia Grayson, care of Granite City Post Office, in a neat, feminine hand. Breaking the seal, she unfolded the single sheet of paper and began to read aloud. "Dear Mrs. Grayson, you do not know me, but I knew your mother, Catherine, when we were girls together in St. Louis. It was by chance that I learned of your existence, and your recent marriage when my husband's business took us through Fairhaven last month. The rumors surrounding your departure from your father's house and his subsequent legal troubles piqued my interest, as I had always wondered what became of my dear friend after her marriage to Rylan Blackett. If you are willing, I would very much like to correspond with you, to share what I remember of Catherine in happier days, and perhaps to offer any assistance that might be useful to you in your new life. My husband's business interests are expanding into the Montana territory, and we expect to visit Granite City ourselves later this summer, with sincere good wishes." Eleanor Harding Olivia looked up from the letter, tears shining in her eyes. "Someone who knew my mother," she whispered. "Someone who remembered her before your father," Rylan finished gently. "It's a gift, Olivia, a connection to your mother that he can't taint or take away." Olivia nodded, carefully refolding the letter. "I'll write back tomorrow, I have so many questions." She placed a protective hand over her belly again. "If we have a daughter, I want to name her Catherine, to honor my mother." "And if it's a boy?" Rylan asked, his own hand coming to rest over hers, the warmth of his palm a comfort and a promise. Olivia smiled. "Thomas," she said softly. "For your brother." Emotion flickered across Rylan's face. Gratitude, love, a touch of old grief transformed into something healing. "Thomas Grayson," he said, testing the name. "It's a good, strong name." "For a good, strong family," Olivia agreed. Later that evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 1 year ago, she had been a prisoner in her father's house, her spirit nearly broken by years of cruelty disguised as discipline. Now she was free not just from her father's control, but free to love, to create, to build a life of her own choosing. "What are you thinking about?" Rylan asked, his arm a warm weight around her shoulders. "About how different everything is," Olivia replied, leaning into his embrace. "A year ago, I couldn't imagine a future worth living. Now I can't imagine wanting any life but this one." Rylan pressed a kiss to her temple. "Any regrets?" Olivia considered the question seriously. "Only that I didn't find the courage to leave sooner," she finally said. "But then, if I had, I might never have found you." "I like to think we would have found each other anyway," Rylan said. "Some things are just meant to be." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Olivia found herself believing him. Their paths had crossed at precisely the moment when both were ready to heal, to hope, to love again. If that wasn't destiny, it was something equally powerful: the resilience of the human heart. its capacity to overcome pain and find joy even in the most unlikely circumstances. And as their child grew beneath her heart, a physical manifestation of the love between them, Olivia knew with absolute certainty that the cruelty she had left behind would never touch this new family they were creating. Here, with Rylan, she had found not just safety but belonging. Not just escape but purpose. Not just a new beginning but a life worth living in all its messy, beautiful fullness. "I love you," she whispered, words that had once seemed impossible to say now flowing as naturally as breath. "And I love you," Rylan answered, his voice carrying all the certainty of a vow renewed each day. "Today, tomorrow, always." Together they watched the stars emerge, two people who had once been lost now found in each other's hearts, their shared future stretching before them as vast and promising as the Montana sky.